Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Live with Andy Dybala. Once again, our favorite journalist joins us on his regular Wednesday spot at 7 p.m. Eastern. George Webb, thank you once again for jumping on the show and digging into the deep state.
It's awesome, Andy, and this is going to be so much fun. This is going to be monkey mutation. It's going to be great.
So George actually posted a couple videos here on his Twitter page at Real George Webb 1. So make sure you go and give him a follow there. But it has relations to the 2001 Space Odyssey. So here we go. He's showing the moment the obelisk appears in Space Odyssey and the monkeys are jumping around. You got the human retrovirus appearing on the screen all of a sudden. University of California Davis Monkey Lab, 1987. There's a UC Davis professor that starts playing God. A young lab assistant is hired. Make sure you go to rumble.com, Neighborhood News Studio, livewithandy.com in case this gets taken off YouTube. His name is Bob Malone, the young protege from UC Davis. You show him doing scientific research, digging in the dirt, looking for hidden Ebola viruses to do research on, SARS coronaviruses. Wait, a light appears beyond the obelisk. He notices something in the dirt. Is it a retrovirus? Bob Malone playing with the humans of remdesivir patient. reverse transcriptase. Happens under pressure, ladies and gentlemen, so you gotta find it. This is when they figure out this is a great way to control society. Just pick up those thigh bones and start beating each other with it. Pick up that mRNA thigh bone. Pick up that sword, and make sure you got the shield beforehand. There's another video. We're going to continue here. I'm getting it loaded up.
Well, Andy, for all of our viewers, you know, that's the beginning of 2001 Space Odyssey. I first saw it when I was 9 years old. And, you know, I think I said to my dad, you know, I didn't understand the movie very well, but I did understand that they had discovered a new tool, that the apes had discovered tools. And then that's going to make a big difference in who gets to guard the water hole. You know, the next scene is the fight at the water hole, and the guys with the tools win, and the other get thrown out. And really, if you want to really go back to UC Davis in 1987, this is where Bob Malone first discovers reverse transcriptase. This is the ability to take something from one organism and write it into another. So you could start with a virus and in a bacteria and then infect something else. And his boss is a guy named Murray Gardner, and he creates a tomato that lasts longer, called the flavor saver tomato, by changing the amount of chemical in the tomato that makes it get spoiled. And they think, what if I could do that in humans? So the whole idea of God's pen is, this is the first chance that humans are going to have to write into the human genome. And from now on, we have the pen in our hand now. The first couple of things they write isn't so beautiful, but reverse transcriptase is that ability to reverse man's role in only being written about by God. Now, man is going to have this chance to potentially write into his own genome, and that's only been God's business up until that point.
So Robert Malone's boss, Murray Gardner, was the guy who released the flavor saver, the first genetically engineered food / tomato that got approved for public consumption.
You might check that. I know it happened at the University of California, Davis. You might want to search for Gardner. I don't know if that's true or not, but he's certainly the person that brings HIV back in a vial from Luc Montagnier, where he meets. They bring this thing back from Africa. So it sort of follows the Africa theme. They fly it back to Paris. They isolate it, and now they've isolated HIV. Like it never came from monkeys, right? Like it just appeared out of nowhere. And of course, I'm making the case here that no, HIV was being worked on down there with the green monkey experiments, and now it's the first person's gotten sick and died, and now that's being flown back, and now boss. This is the whole how Bob Malone gets into the HIV story. Yeah.
Okay, and this is the second video in the 2023 Bob Malone
50 years later.
Space Odyssey, 50 years later.
50 years later.
Our human brain tripled in size,
Not yet.
giving us the ability
am I one
for
too early?
language.
Yeah.
Oh, the 50. I got you. The 50 years later. So sorry, George Webb. I didn't.
No, it's okay. That's a good one. That's good for next here. 2027. Here we go.
Here we go.
We've been through hell together. We spent 4 years. 4 years fighting that virus, and then another 4 fighting each other. It was chaos. But you all know what we're up against. I need to speak to Caesar. And I want you to know, it's not just about power, it's about giving us the hope to rebuild and reclaim the world we lost.
Dawn of the Plot. Now that is a horror movie, George Webb.
Well, apparently the monkey mutations didn't go quite as planned, and we ended up with the kind of a bad situation in 4 years. But I did another alternative ending where Bob Malone answers the questions from the reporter,
Mm-hmm.
and it turns out a whole different way. That's the next one. It's only 1 minute long.
Okay, but so just on that last video, that was like the monkeys that have been experimented on in the cages. Those were the ones that are revolting now, and they want their due.
Yeah, it didn't turn out well.
Didn't turn out well.
But I didn't want to do that ending. I did an alternative ending just so people wouldn't be able to sleep tonight.
I believe Woody Harrelson is a bad guy in that movie too, isn't he? But here's the third act of 2020. I hope you guys are back from your bathroom and refreshment breaks. Here's the third act of 2023, Bob Malone, Space Odyssey.
Our human brain tripled in size, giving us the ability for language,
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
questions, answers, discovery, learning, teaching, advancement, technology, better life, less suffering. It's time we start answering questions to move forward and stop attacking each other. Our human brain.
And it doesn't, I don't have the zinger ending, but what happens is Bob Malone starts answering questions in a press conference, and we win. You know, we avoid the horrible human ape battle, and it all turns out it's not Planet of the Apes, it's Planet of the Humans. So it doesn't have quite the punch that Planet of the Apes does, but anyway, it's a good ending.
Yeah, it's always a CIA spy that's really in control of what's going on. It's not the apes versus the humans, after all. But there's a reason we bring up Bob Malone. The past couple of shows, we have been pounding him into the pavement a little bit. I'll say we've been opening up the history books and showcasing everyone his whereabouts when it comes to the virus vaccine game and Ebola, Zika, and now the SARS coronavirus, and that's not to mention that he's the mRNA inventor as well. So his buddy, you've been digging into him a lot lately, Michael Callahan. That's our little Wuhan connection, and these two seem to be just like the Bonnie and Clyde, like one in the United States, one in China, that's like kind of wrecking havoc when it comes to the SARS-CoV-2 plandemic that broke out in 2019. And you've been doing a lot of extra work into Michael Callahan lately in his affiliations with the Massachusetts General Hospital, Harvard, and his relationships in Wuhan. Can you dig into some of that a little bit, because that seems to be one of the keys to the breakout? Because if you get into diplomatic immunity and you got these people going back and forth from MGH in China, it's there can and they're sharing information, that a lot of stuff can happen in between if there's some cracks.
Well, at this point, it's so long ago now, Andy, it feels like I'm doing archaeology and studying apes or something like that, bones, 3 years ago now. But the only reason why this is a fun parlor game still is because guess what documents Trump is holding out to be why they're, pulling out the Stormy Daniels thing 4 years later or 6 years later, I guess almost 6 years later. And it's about the origins of coronavirus. So that's the running theme here, is that I go to the origins of apes and then the origin of man, which is completely different, obviously. And the now we go to the origin of the coronavirus. And were there things that happened on September the 11th, 2019, that created an audit trail that we can follow, that will follow all the way to why Trump has been indicted, basically, and why and how Trump can win his freedom if he gives these papers up? Or is he going to be the prisoner in the castle and go to the guillotine, defying the giving up these papers? So that's really what all this is about, I think, at this point. And we'll take it from there.
So like the documents that were found in Mar-a-Lago that everyone's been making a big fuss about, and then they bring this indictment into play, and they're like, give us those papers, give us those coronavirus origin documents back. And Trump, it's like, if he holds on to them, it's yeah, he's gonna get his head cut off. And if he gives them up, he can continue with his run for presidency in 2024, which is a shady tactic, if you ask me. I'd like to think if he came out with the information, that would only help his case and his run for president. But if you're locked up in jail, I don't think you're going to be able, or if you're considered a felon, I don't think you're able to run for president. So, sorry, there's actually a lot of stuff that's kind of been uncovered. I found a deleted, we dig into Bob Malone and Michael Callahan. I found like a deleted press release from his own website. RW Malone. If you didn't know, we talk a lot about Callahan. Malone's like actual company is like RW Malone LLC. That's the one that he kind of, it's just his wife helps him run and everything. But he did a press release stating that him and his wife and their team volunteered their time for this DOMANE program, which came up with all the different therapeutics and cures for SARS coronavirus. Now, I've been digging into the different cures, the remdesivirs, the famotidines, the celecoxibs, and it seems if Michael Callahan was over in China, like beneath the Wuhan's government nose, he wasn't approved to be there. That's why he had to sneak out on the Yangtze River. They did all of these DOMANE like famotidine tests that happened. We're going to get in the blood samples a little bit here in a moment, but this famotidine test that was done in China, there was a remdesivir test, that clinical trial that was done in China. There was a celecoxib clinical trial that was done in China. All the different DOMANE cures that came up on the scene in America were approved in China weeks before for clinical trials than they were in the US. And it seems like almost like they released a virus in China and then like started using China as the testing grounds for therapeutics. Would that seem to be one of the cases here? I'll pull up some of the documents here.
I think you got it. I think it's Bob Malone, really, his specialty is running clinical trials and getting drugs approved. And if you think about it, China was one huge stealth trial for everything. Stealth trial for monoclonal antibodies, stealth trial for therapeutics, and stealth clinical trial for vaccines.
Yeah, and like this right here, Gilead's remdesivir to enter trials for coronavirus treatment. Gilead Sciences has partnered with Chinese health authorities to conduct a randomized phase 3 clinical trial to assess the use of antiviral drug candidate remdesivir for the potential treatment of coronavirus. Now, this started on February. did a little bit of research. It started on February 6th, and the remdesivir coronavirus trials in the United States started with this like act with two T's and a one program on February 21st. So a couple weeks before remdesivir was trials started here in the United States, they were pushing it in China as well, and they were doing the same thing with hydroxychloroquine, and they said and chloroquine, the actual like full agent, and like some of the tests like came back like moderately successful, but eventually all of them same thing. There was issues with the tests actually in China. They said like they ran them in France, and they were saying they didn't actually run double-blind placebo clinical trials, so they weren't approved, and all the data was kind of pushed to the side. And that seems to be like some of the stuff of what's going on here.
Well, I would just add, I think if you talk about the Capital Medical University trial in Beijing, the quad blind, they were actually doing the trials at least back before the World Military Games, all the way back to September 11th, I believe, was the shotgun start for a whole bunch of these trials simultaneously. So whatever you're seeing here is press release talk, but actually there's no reason to do a trial and a live exercise in China before you do the live exercise in the United States, if you're going to do them at the same time. If you're going to fly the plane and test the plane in the wind tunnel and then test it around and do touch and goes around the Boeing field when you're making the plane, you do that first and get all that out of the way and shake all the problems out first before you do your transcontinental flights, to put it in a plane analogy. And if you're trying to avoid side effects for the American trials, you want to make all your mistakes in China under lock and key and under secrecy. But if you remember, this was thrown on our lap. You weren't in the group yet on the Potomac, but this is thrown in our lap, that the Chinese are saying, hey, you brought it here to do your trial here, and then you took it back to the United States. And the State Department was the common linkage and NATO personnel. So that sets up, so we can go ahead and read the rest of this trial here. But just remember that there's a lot of other trials going around all over China at this time.
Well, yeah, and that's important, because one of the things, some of the research you were getting into this weekend was the Michael Callahan. I'm trying to find it on your page right now. You post a lot of information, George Webb. It's hard to keep up on your Twitter page every once in a while, but I had accidentally refreshed. I'm like trying to scroll and find your Michael Callahan MGH connection, but the Michael Callahan, who was sending the SARS samples to Bob Malone to run through his domain system. His connections in China are very, very important to the origins of the SARS-CoV-2, because he's an admitted CIA agent. He's worked within the DARPA program. He's developed like synthetic biology, and he's actually part of this accelerated vaccine program within DARPA, which became Operation Warp Speed. And he's in China, unbeknownst to their government, and he has this connection in the United States with the Massachusetts General Hospital. And they were over there. This gets into your Shuang Wu. The Massachusetts General Hospital started building some different hospitals around China in like the mid 2010s, and one of them happened to be the Smart Hospital in Jinhao, if I say that correctly, that was helped build by Johnson Controls. And if they're the ones that are controlling like air vents, and there's like a whole coronavirus spread around the China, it wasn't just focused in Wuhan like they like to make you think. It was like all around the country in these different little pockets. It's just there's a lot of evidence pointing to like this Michael Callahan, Robert Malone, and now Shuang Wu MGH like just profiles connecting coronavirus. Can you dig into some of that a little bit? I'm trying to find your work here on your Twitter
Well,
page.
first, I mean, I think the Chinese government knew full well what Michael Callahan was doing. He was a part of a USAID Predict program in 2009. He had an MIT chair in Wuhan, the MIT chair, and also a Harvard chair. So he's under official academic cover with the CIA. He also is quite openly working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology and Zheng Li, the bat lady. They are testing combinations. They go through 20,000 different spike combination sequences. Those are on the computer on September 11th, 2019, that is hacked, and then they take down that computer on September the 12th. There's a remediation that occurs for this lab where the State Department is involved. If you remember, in 2018, there's 3 separate State Department teams, germ teams, that go to the lab because they're afraid or concerned about leaks. You and I did shows 2 years ago where this information for 2019 and the leak concern in 2019 is there's a State Department team there. They do a huge upgrade of the air conditioning system. They throw out the old vendor. They put in a new vendor. We still don't know if that one is Johnson Controls and York Air Conditioning or not. But what we're saying is we know that there's somebody named Virginia Benassi that goes there and does the training. And this is the same person who's getting at the leaky lab. And we say that there's a report. We say it's kind of like what I did on my summer vacation. You know, that first report you have to write when you go back to school. There it is. There's the hospital, Shuangwu Hospital in Shanghai. Yeah. Zhihao, I think it is.
Zhihao.
So all we're saying is there's got to be some documentation, a trip report. They spend gazillions of money on the new air conditioning system at the Wuhan lab. So there's the trip report coming back, just like they had 3 other ones and 3 other State Department contingents. Nobody travels in China go over and fix BSL-4 labs without a State Department diplomatic immunity and being watched the whole time. They're in there. They're not just running around to all the different Chinese BSL labs doing training and then just kind of going off to the hotel. So Michael Callahan, his story doesn't really match of how he gets the blood samples out later. We'll get to the blood samples in a minute.
Yeah, here's your Massachusetts General Hospital, their Chinese Scientists and Staff Association, and this gets into your like diplomatic immunity. You got a gentleman that's working within the Department of Defense, within DARPA, also running back and forth between this Massachusetts General Hospital and these different hospitals in China, and there just happens to be this outbreak going on. And them testing them testing the therapeutics and the cures in China before they did in the United States. I'll pop some of these other ones on the screen here in a moment. What are your thoughts on that? Because when you've done some speaking into the sword and shield program over the weekend, is that part of like a military operation of what's going on with Ukraine and Russia? Is there going to be an upcoming war with China? What exactly? I'm just kind of spitting some stuff out there. Like, is this all part of the sword and shield operation?
Well, in any kind of civil defense situation, you remember McDuff was on the civil defense for the nuclear civil defense. You have to prepare your population in the case of warfare, and the new warfare is biowarfare. The book, we get into this a little bit in World War DARPA. One way of doing this is sounding all the alarms and sirens in a city and say, come to a local air raid shelter and get your vaccination for whatever. And we'll just wait until the next time and we'll sound the air raid sirens again. But what could happen in the new modern day era is that you're sounding the air raid sirens all the time. And if there was a way that you could use a small drone device, the ones they did in Wuhan, to sort of dust the population with an aerosolized virus that everybody just breathes in naturally, it's almost like a cleansing system, and they were talking about using these in the United States for stadiums, for different venues, where they would clean the stadium before people came in. But the idea here is, well, why not? It's sort of like air freshener, only it keeps you from dying if the Russians attack. And then you would see if you have a little bit of sickness that you make in people, and then they raise antibodies, and then they prepares them for the big one. So every once in a while, you have to do a national drill. It's much easier and much more quiet to do it this way. This is the actual PO that Bob Malone says he did it for free. Well, if you go to usaspending.gov, if you go back a little bit,
the top here,
it says it's a $2.1 billion purchase order with Leidos Labs. It says it's in progress, 3 years and 4 months. It says it's the Department of Defense. So if you look down through this actual contract, right, Massachusetts Institute of Technology that Michael Callahan is working on, you can see here that it ends in 2026, about the time Bob Malone makes the monkey movie.
I think Bob Malone has some type of like trust or something set up so he can say he's volunteering his time and working for free, because that's what he said in his little press document there. And like the companies that he owns gets paid, and therefore he says he doesn't get paid, but yet he has these billion-dollar contracts with the government. That's my guess.
We could go ahead and step in if Bob has said, hey, I don't want any of the money. Bob, feel free to go ahead and send the $2.1 billion our way. And here is the kind of the disincentive in the United States that's created. This NCTAP is a 20% kicker if you prescribe remdesivir on the whole hospital bill. So if you have somebody run up a $200,000 hospital bill and you throw in remdesivir, it makes it $240, even if they only have remdesivir a couple of days of their stay. So we're looking at, they're really pushing remdesivir here.
So they're getting paid more to push the same thing they were doing with like mRNA and all that stuff. You're getting paid more. The hospitals are actually getting paid to push these therapeutics. Now, like, we all know doctors, and not all doctors, I don't want to lump them all, but like they're all like a lot of them were on like the Sackler family nipple, like Purdue Pharma nipple, when it came to like just actual like Oxycontin and prescription painkillers and stuff like that. Now, is this like the same type of program that they're running with coronavirus?
Well, there's a book called Empire Pain about the Sackler family and the whole Oxycontin, pyramid scheme, I guess you'd call it. This is a little different in that this is not for a chronic situation. Hopefully you take the remdesivir and then you get off of it. But what could have been happening in sort of a national air raid type of thing, or a national biosimulation, or a national live exercise, it could have been, we want to test all the parts of this. And it's probably going to cause some people to go into cytokine storm, and some people are probably going to die from this. And so this is actually from Trial Site News. This is the Leidos SAIC trial that comes out of this for Bob Malone and famotidine. And the reason I say that the cart's before the horse here, Andy, is that they order all the remdesivir in January for 4 months before they do the study, which is for repurposing. The repurposing is to try to see if there's something that you can grab just off the shelf. But they already have the new solution on the shelf ready to go before they do the DOMANE study. And that's the big part here that I think America wants the answer to that question. Why did you put the cart before the horse? Why did you put the new experimental therapies and order all that? And then we're still running these trials 3 years later about can we repurpose something that already exists.
Yeah,
That's
they're pretty much just like these. We already own these. They're already FDA approved. Let's line up our own ducks, and let's knock them down. And if one of them ends up standing up, we're a winner in the long run. And then like it ends up all the ducks were dead in the end. And
I didn't do dead baby ducks just because I think that would have been a downer. That would have been a downer. I thought the hammering it.
but this there's the same kind of program. You're saying, I didn't know this, that Bill and Melinda Gates had the same type of DOMANE program. Can you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, Mark Kulak discovered this. It comes from the Defense or the Department of Defense's Security Cooperation Agency, and that's the agency that actually gets the money from the DoD, gets the weapons from the DoD, and then sends them to Kolomoisky or Ukraine or whoever. And was out of Columbus when I was down there with Kevin Timmer on the tarmac, and the guy running, or the State Department guy sitting on that runway, was Jeff Epstein, if you remember, and Les Wexner running. And a lot of this was for the Weapons for Israel program. But that same group, the DSCA, runs a program called Reframe. And Reframe, you remember the Jay Giles band song about Reframe? Maybe that was
no, I don't, George.
That was before you were born. But everybody's had that experience where they've reframed something. They've taken it out of an old frame, and then they put it in a new modern frame because they changed their decor. This is the sort of the idea, which was, well, we'll take, or they call it off-brand drugs for a doctor. Hey, we've got this famotidine that we do for heartburn, acid reflux. Let's see if it'll work for COVID. Now, it could have been that they did this subscription or tried the famotidine because they have what they call dosing studies, where you say, okay, we're going to do this level of dosing for remdesivir. It had failed pretty badly in 2018 with Ebola. Half of the people in the study died. So dosing would say, well, let's cut it in half so not so many people die, and let's cut it in half again. So we'll do 1x, 2x, 4x, 8x, or whatever. And that could have been what was happening, and that could be still what's happening with DOMANE right now with remdesivir. Yeah.
Now, what's their like? I know it's probably hard for you to answer this question, but like, what is supposed to be their like line of approval for one of these cures? Like we were looking at the famotidine one, and like 15% of the people died in that clinical trial that was done. Like what's like the line? Is it like 2%, 3% before the FDA like approves this stuff, or like is it like 10% and then we add a steroid in there, or we work some other stuff? Is that the process? Like
it's different from different drugs, because I mean, sometimes in cancer where it's stage 4 cancer, and everybody's going to die real soon, so they have what they call compassionate use. And so what you're trying to do is not so much keep everybody from dying, but you're trying to move the number in the Kaplan-Meier curve, they call it. You're trying to move the number of people that live, this way. If this is time and the number of people dying going this way, you're trying to move the line up, so people live longer. And the Kaplan-Meier curve is what you're looking at there. But famotidine, 15% of the people dying. And the study this first DOMANE study lasts from February 25th all the way to April 13th. If the study is for remdesivir, that's a lot of bodies to stack up in the United States of America. 15%. And you found the number. It was 238 out of 1,600. That's a lot of bodies to stack up for Pepcid AC. And I think they stopped this study, because it's famotidine and remdesivir. I don't think there's any way famotidine could have run up these kind of deaths all by
itself. Like just like a heartburn medication. Like even if I don't have like heartburn, I could go take like a Pepsid AC right now and I'd be pretty much fine, correct?
Yeah, these are 9 times your normal thing and it's intravenous, but still,
yeah,
that's racking up so this ends on April 13th, and then another PO comes out on the 14th that Bob Malone says he when he started it. So there's a time shift here problem because, again, you're a cart before the horse. You're testing remdesivir and running up all these deaths before you get the PO for famotidine. And wait a minute, I thought we were going to repurpose the drugs first and then go to something that was a failed drug, right? Remdesivir had only failed and killed half of the people in Ebola. So why are we doing that study first? It's completely backwards. Like we order it all first for 4 months, Rick Bright does, and that you can't do anything about that. And now we're going to run a trial and we kill 15 or 20% of the or 15% of the people in that. And now we're going to look at the repurposing study, which still isn't finished yet.
Oh, sorry. I think George cut off there for a second. His camera might have died for a moment, but I got a press release. I don't know, just happened to go away. Hopefully he gets reconnected here in a moment. But a press release from Robert Malone himself, and this is it's now deleted from his website. But I'm going to read a little bit of it because it highlights kind of some of the work he did with Michael Callahan. But a multi-site randomized double-blind comparative trial of the safety and efficacy of hydroxychloroquine and famotidine for the treatment of COVID-19 in hospitalized adults. R.W. Malone is honored to announce a multi-site blah, blah, blah. He announces it. R.W. Malone is pleased to announce enrollment of an innovative, rigorous clinical trial designed to rapidly assess the safety and clinical benefit of a combination of 2 widely available and inexpensive, let me zoom in, inexpensive repurposed generic drugs for treatment of hospitalized patients suffering with COVID-19 disease. So when he kind of likes to put some distance in between himself and this DOMANE program, don't really believe it too much. It was really under his guidance. It was under his thumb the whole time. Under the guidance of Dr. Malone, clinical trials were initiated at Northwell Health System in New York. This effort has been based on a tremendous effort by many people and corporations. By working closely with the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Preparedness and Response, HHS, and the Department of Defense, this specifically right here, he says he works closely with the office, this ASPR within the HHS, that's actually Michael Callahan. That's his role. He actually got like demoted from his role at MGH so he could like focus on this a little bit, and he became like the assistant secretary for preparedness of response at the HHS. So that is Michael Callahan. And the Department of Defense, DTRA, this clinical trial provides patients hospitalized with COVID-19 disease the opportunity to volunteer for a clinical trial that may bring new hope to all risk or infection by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So Robert Malone was asking for volunteers for remdesivir, famotidine, celecoxib clinical trials, and he sent here out in the public acting like he's an innocent being. The clinical trial is being conducted at New York State largest healthcare provider and private employer, with 23 hospitals and nearly 800 outpatients facilities. I hope George can reconnect here soon. His phone probably died. It's probably recharging. Northwell Health is continually striving to find more innovative and effective ways to improve the health of our patients or communities, our country, and the world. Now, some of the articles I read act like Northwell Health actually was the prime contractor for this $20 million clinical trial bid, but it was actually Allchem who was the primary contractor. And this states this later on in the article. And Northwell Health was the subcontractor for these DOMANE famotidine clinical trials. George, you are back. Thank you for re-jumping back in. It's good to see you. I was just reading the Robert Malone press release where he pretty much was admitting to being like the lead on the DOMANE program, and offering him and his wife being the leads on the program, and they volunteer their time for free. And anytime you see this assistant secretary for preparedness and response within the HHS, that's actually Michael Callahan. So they like to disguise like who they are in some of their wording here. But I forget what you were talking about when you got cut off, George. I think it was the Sword and Shield program, maybe, if I'm correct.
Andy, I'm sorry. I think I'm having a little bit of a connection problem. I don't know if Bob is running the board there or not, but when did this come out? I guess that's my first question.
Oh, this was from his website, and as you can see here at the top, this is a press release that Robert Malone, I think he wrote it. It's on his website, but April 28th, 2020, so spring of 2020.
Well, my question again is, there's this black hole between his book when he gets his first communication with Michael Callahan, right, on January 4th, and he's told to spin up the DOMANE team, or spin up the guys at DTRA. I assume that means the DTRA repurposing machine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if he said, well, I didn't trust DOMANE yet because it was new, and so I used Reframe as well. Reframe had 12,000 drugs. DOMANE had 27,000. I might want to go to the records of DARPA and look at DARPA's recommendation for coronaviruses in 2016 that said ivermectin. I might want to go to people who were running trials and had experienced already the live exercise in Wuhan for 120 days. I would want all that information as I'm making my my move here. But what I guess I don't understand is, if I got the call, and this is the call, remember he tells this story at the Biogen conference in February on how he's the guy, right, that everyone was looking to, and he wrote a book. I don't know if you can still hear me or not.
Yeah, you're breaking up just a tad bit, but we can still hear you.
Why did he wait 3 months to start working on DOMANE? It seems like the first thing to do. I mean, if you called me on the 4th and said, spin up your team at DTRA because we got to find repurposed drugs, what I would do is I would get out my computer and I would type in run DOMANE program, hit the key, and I would run maybe on another computer if it took up a lot of space. I'd run the Reframe computer, and then on a third computer, I might look up what they had already computed.
Yep.
If this was going to happen in the kind of the contingency book. And
then you send your other samples to Josh Patel and see what he's doing on his little.
Yeah, that's fine too. I mean, if you have a third party contractor you want to send it out to as well. But pretty quickly, I'm thinking a day, maybe, if let's say it runs all night, 24 hours. Let's even say it's slow and it's like doesn't have enough disk space or whatever, and there's some problems he encounters. Maybe a couple of days in, it takes him to come up with ivermectin, or famotidine and ivermectin or whatever. But it seems like that's really important information before you go and order all the remdesivir in January. I mean, why would you even run the program at all? If you know you're going to do remdesivir, just throw the program out and forget about the cover story.
I agree. And that's why I kind of like, you can kind of read in this little press release he had here, he tried to like put a little distance in between him and Michael Callahan, but also at the same time he said they like work together to save the world on other when it came to other outbreaks. But if you don't mind, I can read a little bit of
Sure.
this bit here, because he digs into some of the work they were doing. So here's just this is, I think, written by Dr. Malone himself. But Dr. Michael Callahan is a physician scientist that works as an infectious disease mass casualty infection doctor at MGH Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, and who has developed the blockbuster anti-infective drugs for the U.S. government and for industry. Has a joint clinical appointment at Sister Hospital in China. So even Dr. Malone is acknowledging his sister hospital appointment in China. Dr. Callahan also serves as a senior executive at United Therapeutics, blah, blah, blah. We already kind of know all this stuff. He's triple boarded in internal medicine, infectious disease, tropical medicine, and is one of the few command physicians based in the United States who specialize in mass casualty infection therapies. I'm going to move forward here a little bit. With the advent of the outbreak of novel coronavirus infection during December 2019, Dr. Callahan was granted a leave of absence by United Therapeutics CEO Martine Rothblatt to travel to China to assist clinical colleagues in mass infection management of COVID-19 under his joint appointment. Now, we know in Michael Callahan's own words that he was like there unbeknownst to the Chinese government. So it's odd that it was approved by United Therapeutics on our end first. And then here comes some distancing from Malone. Unaware of the work by Dr. Malone, Dr. Callahan worked with, he's talking about his Malone's work with DOMANE. Unaware of the work by Dr. Malone, Dr. Callahan worked with Asian colleagues to analyze medical records from over 6,000 hospitalized patients, 1,100 of whom had severe disease. This analysis of clinical data revealed that about 600 of these patients were on antacid therapies. We already know the story of famotidine and them testing in China. Then Dr. Callahan was then recruited to serve as a special advisor on COVID-19 to the ASPR within the HHS, and he was put on leave within United Therapeutics. But Dr. Malone presented a summary of team findings and recommendations to the ASPR on March 18th, 2020. So he's saying they ran their like clinical trials and their algorithms and stuff within the DOMANE system, and he presented the findings to Dr. Callahan himself. Is that a little?
I'd say about 90 days off.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, is Rick Bright saying that he made his whole decision on remdesivir to order 4 months of remdesivir? Is he saying he made that decision based on one person, Snohomish County man? And Snohomish County man wasn't even done. The first patient zero in the United States wasn't even done with his first 5-day course when they ordered all that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what they're saying, that they were so far out of protocol that they just threw the book out? And
that almost seems to be like what they don't present it as such, but that seems to be like what's happening, just so they can make their money on the back end.
This seems like a history that's written and almost exactly forwarded 90 days in advance from his previous story. Remember, he goes on Joe Rogan and says it's Q4 2019. So it seems like we've moved everything, shifted now. We've backdated a press release to the appropriate time.
Well, this was written about a month after that meeting with Dr. Callahan that took place. So
the date that they typed on the top was a month. Yeah.
But like that's what Dr. Malone likes to say, like, well, they weren't approving any of my treatments and I got pissed off. And then that's when he goes like scorched earth on all of his old partners apparently, but he won't like mention them by name. So, but in this article, he kind of knows what's going on, so he does like put a little distance between him and Callahan as they go. But he also calls them, like in the next line, as old friends. It is not the first time that they have worked to save the world, in quotation marks.
So let me see if I understand this. We have a standing purchase order that we've paid a 4-year purchase order. Well, it's now been renewed out to 2026. 1.4 billion has been paid out so far for this program. We just showed you the PO, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's to prevent breakouts of new entities. That's the N and the E.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to discover those new medical countermeasures. And so when this critical alarm bell rings in December of 2019, supposedly, I think that the live exercise actually ran from September the 19th, the day Trump signed the bill to pay for the simulation, to pay for the drug testing, basically, for the next 90 days. Nothing happened. So let's just say, take their word for it, that the first case is in November. Well, we know that's not true. The State Department's already said it was the big cluster was the World Military Games. We're going to wait all the way till April to run the DOMANE program under a $2 billion, 1.4 billion paid out so far. So we're 1.4 billion into this thing. And it's like paying the firemen 1.4 billion. And then when the fire bell rings, you go, I'll be back in about 6 months.
I'll let the virus spread all around the world, and then we'll come up with we'll be here to put out the fire.
Their press release, not mine. This is getting worse. I think they should rethink this.
Well, he deleted it off his website. This was found on the Wayback Machine. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think they might want to rethink this one.
Yeah, it's definitely he thought it was gone forever, but in the Internet of Things, as you know, stuff continues to live on. But in the end of this article, he mentions that the Dr. Malone then wrote the initial clinical protocol. So he wrote the clinical protocol himself. This was reviewed and edited by Dr. Malone, together with doctors Martin Lesser, a biostatistician, and Joe Conigliere, a general internal medicine doctor within the Northwell Hospital System. Robert was also the primary technical author, writing the federal funding contract, which he always does, which was subsequently funded by BARDA for over $20 million 3 days later to perform this clinical trial. So it only took 3 days for it to be approved. Under this contract, I thought is this important at all? Allchem is the prime contractor and Northwell is the subcontractor. Is that important? Because I always thought Northwell was the prime contractor.
No, Allchem is getting the money, and then they're doling out to different hospitals, and different hospital leads. You run a 25 person at your hospital, you run a 25 over here, and then we'll cobble together the 1,600 that we need. Let's say this is all true. Let's say this is the actual timing, and they did wait a full 3 months in order for mRNA to get a head start. We know that the Seattle trials, and this is the other thing I put on the website, we know those started in March 6th. mRNA started. So not only did we order all the remdesivir in January for a 4-month supply, which was probably paid for by Trump's executive order, but we started the mRNA trials in March.
Mm-hmm.
So even by their own estimation here, we waited to do the mRNA first, the emergency first, and did the repurposing that we were supposed to do later. That's what this tells me, because I know I've got a ton of articles talking about how the mRNA started just conveniently in Seattle, where there was already a Seattle flu study going on and already people collecting data. And Matt Pottinger's brother was up there running it with the gal from the University of Washington, the gal from the Broad Institute in Boston. So I just can't, they have to think through the timeline a little bit closer. Because would you really wait that long? I mean, maybe that's the
Well,
maybe
I think that's why you see his like Twitter history deleted. You're seeing some of the stuff deleted. I think they're trying to cover up that timeline and trying to smear it a couple months, and it's hard to do with the because I have like in these some of these clinical trials that were done in China, they were all done in February. And that's like kind of would be on the timeline of running it through DOMANE and sending it through China, and then it gets approved. And
I've seen Mark, for instance, what they're trying to do is say we had time to do all those numbers in the United States, right? But when you do that, you make it look like you're not responding in an emergency situation for 90 days. What they don't want to admit is the real trials were run in China, and then they made all the decisions secretly based on the Chinese numbers. That's the thing that we're trying to get away from here.
And yeah, and I think that's what's really going on, because China wasn't like cooperating at first when it came to like the origins of the coronaviruses. They were holding on to all those blood samples. They didn't give like the biolabs the SARS-CoV-2 samples to work on. And we know Michael Callahan has his connections with the hospitals over there. I'm wondering if they're kind of just keeping things under wraps while they figured out how to move forward exactly.
Well, this is where Trump again has the Trump cards. Trump knows why he signed that bill, and he's not going to let people hang this on him, saying that we had the alarm bell sounding on January the 4th, and we didn't do anything about it until to look at remdesivir until 3 months later. He's not going to do that. He's going to say, hey, I signed this thing on September the 19th, a week after September 11th. So what was the date on that last study that you had, the remdesivir study in China? Is that
that was the, what was it? 1 second here. Trying to pull it up. It's loading. That says April 29th, but I have, where's the one? I have too many tabs open. Let me find it real quick. I have that the clinical trial for remdesivir started in China on February 6th. Just give me a moment.
Well, Mark Kulak produced the hydroxychloroquine study that on February 4th. So the trial was all done and in the box, on February 4th. And if you run these trials over 90 days, if you look at the Capital Medical University in Beijing, where they run 4 different studies, it's into 2019. I mean, folks, there's no way that you can have a breakout and a lockdown of a city and not kick off, which happened in September from the data, and not throw in all of your response mechanism. You've called the fire department on September the 11th. You get a massive order from Trump for funding for response. I think everybody watching says you either threw the mechanisms and machinery into responding to this thing, or you use the money to pay for your clinical trials. And basically you're running a live exercise in China, and then you're running the live exercise from what you've learned. You're rerunning it. Maybe that's the whole idea of reframe. You're rerunning it in the United States.
That is actually I have it on my Twitter here, George Webb. So here you have the clinical trials for Gilead's remdesivir started more than 2 weeks earlier than in the U.S., just like famotidine, because we know Callahan sent like the famotidine stuff before it was tested here in the United States. It's looking more and more like U.S. genetically engineered a virus, released it in China, then you can say NATO too, then use China as a testing ground for therapeutics run through DOMANE systems set up by Malone in the U.S. and Callahan in China. So here's the Gilead's remdesivir to enter clinical trials, and that was written on February 4th, and they entered the trials on February 6th. after this, couple days after this article was written. And here is the Act 1 clinical trials. And this is your remdesivir clinical trials. Enrollment for Act with 2 T's 1 began on February 21st, 2020. So it's enrollment, but I don't know exactly when they put the needle in the person's arm, and ended on April 19th. So that's when the trial actually ended, was on April 19th. There were 60 trial sites and 13 subsites in the United States, 45 sites, 8 in Denmark, 5 in the UK, 4 in Greece, 3 in Germany, 2 in Korea, 2 in Mexico, 2 in Spain, 1 in China, and 1 in Singapore. Eligible patients were randomly assigned a 1-to-1 ratio to receive either remdesivir or placebo. Randomization was stratified by study and site and disease severity at enrollment. So there's your it started on February 21st, and the ones in China started on February 6th.
Well, let me tell you what I found.
Okay.
You may remember me going to, even before Bob Malone made his appearance on Joe Rogan in November of 2021, and I found that Bob Malone had been involved in this critical period of time where we're supposedly reacting to this thing coming from China. And he had written a paper in January, right? He had written a paper in January of 2021 or 2020 talking about autobody dependent enhancement, meaning this is an unattended side effect from coronavirus.
Can you explain what autobody dependent enhancement is?
It's an unintended side effect which causes a haywire cytokine storm.
Okay.
And it does it by not attacking the drug doesn't go through the normal route and doesn't do its job, which is basically, boxing out under the basket is how you're supposed to do it. Keep it away. You're supposed to keep me away from the rim by boxing me out. That's what the drug's supposed to do. But what happens to happen, it goes and kind of, the back door, it takes the back door and gets in the cell through the part of the cell called the functional constant, or the FC pathway. So you can see me in Alachua, Florida, saying, how could Bob Malone know about with Alchem, how could he know about the autobody dependent enhancement if he wasn't in January analyzing the sequence as soon as the sequence was published, and he wasn't actively modeling the coronavirus during that time? He's saying he's not running DOMANE until 3 months later. But I had said the reason I was in front of the University of Florida is there's this guy, his name's Ira Linguini. I think I got his name wrong in the video. I didn't say Ira Linguini. I think I said it's Ira Longini.
Longini. Is this your last video you posted?
No. This is
a while ago.
November 2021.
Okay.
And if you look at Ira Longini's role at the WHO, right? These are all people at the WHO. This is a WHO. This is a WHO sort of directory. Ira Longini is an immunization,
vaccines, and biologicals, family health, and children's health.
And he's the guy who's doing these computer models. Ira Longini is the guy who, you'll hear Bob Malone talking about this in 2017. Hey, why don't we model what we're trying to do before we get all the well plates and get all the 1,000 talents Chinese students working with in vitro? You model it in silico of what you're trying to target so that you have a better idea of what you're going to do before you actually work with the well plates in vitro in the petri dishes. Okay. Well, if you look through on the same page, on the same page, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the same World Health Organization page. You remember that was immunizations, vaccines, biologicals, family and women's and children's health.
Mm-hmm.
The other name you'll see
is the one and only
Virginia Benassi.
So we have a Bob Malone, Virginia Benassi. That's
Correct.
your domain connection or computer algorithm connection.
So the same person who's doing the modeling for WHO and the blueprint, right? And the stuff you'd need for the blueprint, Linguini or Longini. I hope I said antibody dependent enhancement. It's not really an enhancement. ADE isn't an enhancement. It's a bad side effect. They call it an enhancement to try to hide it, but it's not an enhancement. Autobody dependent enhancement, Bob Malone writes that paper. It's not an enhancement. It's a bad thing. And that he writes the paper in January 2021. So if I misspoke, I misspoke. But in order to write a paper like this,
here's your WHO bids, by the way, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, here's your WHO bids where Virginia Benassi's getting all the bids. Again, they're saying I'm targeting her. I'm not targeting her. She's the one who put her name on the RFP, right? And this is why we always get taken down for showing who at the WHO gets the purchase order, right? Why is that? All queries go to benassiv@who.int. The person that works with her, right? It's a small group, right? At Geneva, he's working here.
And that's for your WHO research and development blueprint. So that's your upcoming therapeutics and vaccines.
And Ira Longini is Bob Malone's closest person he's worked with for years, doing modeling. Okay, what he calls modeling, and that's doing it in silico before you do it in vitro for years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is Ira Longini. Ira Longini would be needed to run and create domain type programs. Ira Longini would be the one that you would run with reframe type programs. So now here a new picture is emerging. A new picture is emerging here is that, hey, wait a minute, all the predictive documents you wrote before.
No, it gets deeper too. Is this why our University of Florida COVID-19 data was destroyed? Because Ira Longini was from working in the health department there.
Well, I also chased down a Chinese student that was doing imaging of all the lungs from all the original patients. And they were trying to come up with an AI way, sort of a Klaus Schwabian way to do lung categorization and lung scoring, basically from the scarring. Has Longini ever mounted Malone's horse? Well, it's an interesting question to ask. I mean, since then I've been back to the University of Florida. I can't count how many times. Ira Longini really should be a part of this discussion because he would have been, for me, if let's say there's a video out there of him talking in 2017, I think Mark Kulak published it, saying, hey, the first thing I do is I go, when I'm presented with a new problem, a new vaccine that I have to come out with, I use Ira Longini, right? In the Ebola breakout with Michael Callahan, I go and I use Ira Longini because he's the one who's going to be able to tell me the lock and key, and he's also going to be able to do the slight variations, maybe something called like directed evolution to figure out the best combination. And these things aren't static systems. They're waving in the wind like flags. So you got to make sure the two flags meet up together. It's harder than just a static lock and key connection. So Ira Longini is my go-to man. It's sort of my Luca Brasi, right? Now, if you did it if that was your go-to guy, if Ira Longini was your go-to guy in Ebola, if Ira Longini was your go-to guy in Zika, again, remember Virginia Benassi is the key person on the SAGE committee right? And, you know, advising the WHO what to do and advising what the Wellcome Trust to do. And she's also part of this thing called the NATO Secretariat. You know, wouldn't you go, if this came up again, right? Wouldn't you go to Ira-Longini to model this thing rather than a 33-year-old molecular forecaster who had just started a business called Molecular Forecasters, right? And all of a sudden, the guy seriously was working on, you know, probably working through graduate school, getting his PhD in mathematics or whatever. But he was working at LensCrafters. And so this is his first job. No, I don't think that's true. I don't think you could know about antibody-dependent enhancement, right, unless you had run tests in Wuhan and you saw this side effect. And Michael Callahan gave you the ADE information, right? And then you published it in 2020. And then you look like a genius the next month when you brought in this world network of scientists, the Boston Consulting Group network, a science, global scientist network. You look like the genius because you could say, table talk, you know, in the Whisper campaign, hey, I modeled this virus when we got the sequence for Ira-Longini, with Ira-Longini. Ira-Longini figured this thing out, just like he did with Ebola, just like he did with Zika.
I think you may be onto something here, George, because I got on the screen right now, University of Florida Health's NIAID funded study helps make remdesivir standard of care for COVID-19 treatment. And the article I had on right before that, University of Florida launches formal investigation after reports of pressure to destroy COVID-19 research data. So Florida is the one that pushed for remdesivir as a standard of care according to the NIAID study, and they were also destroying COVID-19 research data where Ira-Longini is a professor. You got some, definitely, you've connected a little bit.
Well, there's another person at the University of Florida that I also pointed at, which is Bob Malone's longtime partner and recipient of $4 billion, and that's James Talton, because he literally is, we measured it, he's as tall as a ton of cash. Pretty tall guy. He's as tall as a ton of cash. His name is James Talton. And he's also a professor at the University of Florida in the infectious diseases department. He wasn't doing the modeling as much as he was managing the 1,000 Talents type Chinese students and Ukrainian students that were doing, and other students, but he had a big contingent from China. And the reason why they destroyed the study, I feel, is to wipe away all the Chinese students that were working there during this program. There's also a bunch of Ukrainians that went out to, the first time we went to 2021 now, and we stood in front of Allchem and said, hey, this is like, you know, Ukraine, you know, it's like the upgrade. If you were working in Stepnogorsk or, you know, Novosibirsk, and you got upgraded from working in Siberia to working in Odessa, Crimea, that was a nice deal. But you made the big time if you made it to Alachua, Florida. Now it's not much to look at, but you're 2 hours from the beach in either direction. And you're making a lot more money than you ever made back there. And so we were making, and I remember Aaron Adler was the one who was saying, Ukrainian to the left, Ukrainian to the right, Ukrainian everywhere you look, from these old weapons programs. So it seems like they're taking things that were a part of the weapons program and sort of attenuating them. And then miraculously, these breakouts are happening with Michael Callahan, and miraculously, they're coming up with vaccines that they worked on back in Russia and then the Ukraine and now here. Right? It's sort of a virus vaccine game all in one thing. And the Chinese guy that left under FBI suspicion from the University of Florida around the time of the breakout of coronavirus at the military games was taking pictures of lungs so that you could do an AI diagnosis of ground glass presentation in the lungs, and also the more serious cases called crazy paving. So it was going to also usher in smart hospitals, because what you're going to say is, look, this AI system over here was able to diagnose this where human radiologists were not, sort of stacking the deck for smart hospitals. We found Shuang Wu was very involved with the smart hospitals. It also could end up being that Jordan Walker wasn't lying about being at Massachusetts General. When I went there and interviewed all the other 32-year-old residents, he could have been working in Michael Callahan's hospitals in Shanghai and then Hainan, and the other Chinese kind of resort casino hospital island, the other one that they built there, which is more like a casino than it is a hospital, to be honest. And we do have, I'm just going to tell, I told everybody this before, but I do believe they met on a riverboat when he was a dancer on a riverboat on the Mississippi, and they were seen together at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. I mean, this is going to end up being true. I know how hard it is to believe, but this whole thing could be a school play to hide what happened here.
Yeah, and one more thing, before you got here, some caveman cooking going on in the background, so I don't want to keep you.
I don't want to get in the way of that. Oh, you mean over here? No, let's.
But this is an actual article written by Michael Callahan himself, and it's regarding some of the the pre-pandemic process. He digs into like him working with the Soviets and anthrax, and he also digs into some of the work he did with SARS. But there's a couple pieces in this article I thought you might find interesting. I'd like you to expand on. So here's one. It says they're digging into their collaborative research with China and the United States when it came to SARS research. But this news came as the Chinese government was vehemently denying community transmission. The information was shared at significant personal and professional risk to our Chinese colleagues in the early weeks of the pandemic. The Chinese government was actively censoring medical data sharing between Boston and Chinese clinicians, eventually stopping the flow from data from Wuhan entirely. So he's talking about his undercover work he was doing in China, and China was recognizing what was going on, and they were like, no more communication between you two. What are your thoughts on that? And I got one more point from this.
Well, I definitely think that's going to be now putting all the pieces together. I definitely think that's going to be Jordan Walker in China. Because Michael Callahan's way too high profile a figure to get away with that. And all you need to do is basically press the button to get the blood results sent to Boston. So Jordan Walker doesn't have to do any of the beakers and the test tubes. He just needs to press the button and send the email to the results to his other Massachusetts General address. And once it's in the Massachusetts General email system, it's over with. So he could just be sending this stuff over to MGH in Shanghai or MGH in Hainan to the south, and it's over. You don't need to answer. You don't even need to open that. It's on the server for MGH at that point.
And here's another MGH connection. This is at the very end of this article here, but there are also concerns about the reliability of China's large-scale drug and biologics manufacturing. The U.S. could establish a Chinese-U.S. office to help guide Chinese pharmaceutical companies seeking FDA and EMA approval to enter Western markets. So that's something else that you want to keep an eye on in this story as well. It's like they're pushing this stuff over in China. Maybe it can get approved over there first to be pushed in the American markets. But the example has precedent. And now dated Russian CTR programs, former U.S. pharmaceutical executives, former FDA evaluators, and other industry experts helped Russian startup companies meet regulatory milestones for testing drugs in human trials, and a 2004 vaccine training program in Moscow by scientists from Massachusetts General Hospital helped lead eventually to Russia's successful development of the Sputnik V vaccine for COVID-19. So Massachusetts General Hospital has links to Russia's Sputnik vaccine as well.
Yeah, and I think the reason the one guy was murdered who did Sputnik is because the sequence similarity between Sputnik and Spikevax is incredible. And if they originated in Russia for Moderna's Spikevax sequence, then you have a smoking gun that shows directly that it came from Russian weapons program, and it was just laundered by Moderna. And they knew all along what the virus and the vaccine was going to be, because they just rebadged and repurposed the Soviet program. And all we have to do is just have a couple of places where you have beakers and a few computers. We have to go through the motions a little bit, but we're just basically slapping a US label on the old Russian program. All the people are the same. I remember Aaron Adler saying this 2 years ago. It's like, hey, all the people are, Talton, as Mobsterful says, was from the Russian science programs as well. Talton's father, was from the Russian science programs as well. So when he came over to Alachua, Alachua was basically formed by that whole business park there was formed by a bunch of folks who had been associated with the Long Island area hospitals and had moved south for the winter, literally to pick up a whole bunch of land for cheap and make a bio business park there. I mean, it was I hate to say money laundering operation from day one. So I'll say it's a money operation from day two. But this was always going to be in Alachua where this technology landed. They originally had planned, I believe, to put this in Long Island, but they had diverted this, and it ended up being, Ukraine bioweapons reframe central right there in Alachua. And that's just the truth. I mean, I think anybody who goes there and visits there and sees and hears the accents and so forth will know that what I'm saying is the truth.
And if you do go to Alchem Laboratories website from Alachua, and you go onto their team page, he definitely has some of those 1,000 talent scientists and professors working for his company and himself. So there's this just on their head of the teams, Dr. M. Zhang from China, Dr. Lin Hao Zhang, and Dr. Ji Huang. So there's three scientists on his main team page that have connections to China.
If you look at these sequence similarities, they are really the smoking gun, and they aren't natural. Like the furin cleavage site, again, I wrote a book about 3 years ago on this, but the furin cleavage site appeared out of nowhere in cancer cells with the Russians that had come to the University of Washington. They were a part of the illegals program. So while everyone was watching Anna Chapman, the red-haired girl, going down doing the catwalk in New York with all those people that were the buffoons sort of the spy world, the real juice was happening with the two out at the University of Washington. And then they had been working with Dennis Montgomery out there. And they were the ones who put the furin cleavage site into the Lovo cancer cells. And they got the cells from Fred Hutch Cancer Center. I wrote that book 3 years ago. Everybody says conspiracy theory, but it's not conspiracy theory. The original furin cleavage sites were added from Russian weapons programs 20 years ago. That's where this started. I think it's maybe in the World War DARPA because of the smoking gun. But
you wrote too many, George Webb, too many too fast.
Yeah, I wrote too many too fast. But I mean, if you look at the books, they're kind of like snatches of all the information and then ordered in the best way possible. So it's like a rough outline. But now you go, the big books were more kind of like, okay, now I've had time to think about it. Well, let's put 5 of these books together. And now I'm on generation 3 with this new information.
Are your books available anywhere at all? not at
No,
the moment.
no. I mean, everything's been blown away.
We need to get neighborhood news to fire up those printing presses again. I know the printers are just sitting there ready. There's some ink that was needed. That was it. There was no ink left in Temperance and Toledo.
Well,
like the whole tri-state area.
yeah. No, they cut down our ink. Everything was just terrible. So anyway, there's a lot of story here. We always thought Virginia Benassi was Sina Bavari, or somebody at NATO high level intelligence. Maybe it's just a person who is the kind of executive assistant to Giuseppe Benassi of the week, and they just keep the name the same. We don't know for sure, but she keeps popping up in all the right places at all the right times. She's where the lab leak is. She's where the lab bids are coming in. She's where the WHO, the Wellcome Trust. Now she's over here with Ira Longini doing the modeling. You know,
it's like in the head of the Italian CIA's last name is Benassi, not to mention all his links. And she was the driver for, or there's another one that was a NATO driver, a NATO Supreme Allied Commander driver. And I want to say one thing about her before you go.
Sure.
Just, she's from Boulder, Colorado. Guess where Michael Callahan's from?
Boulder, Colorado.
Boulder, Colorado. So
I think Michael's there right now. Everybody is, and also there's another person that I did a story on that lived in Boulder, Colorado at that time. It's because the Super Soldier program was there. I said this 3 years ago now, that the oxygen carrying capacity for athletes was being studied in Boulder, Colorado Springs. But there's another big biking community as Boulder. But Colorado Springs is important because that's where all of our Olympic teams are. And by doing the mountain biking, it's the most demanding against your oxygen debt. Long distance biking uphill in rarefied air. It's all the highest level. The bar is the highest on the athletes. And if you're going to be testing something that reduces your opponent's ability to breathe, and you want to increase your ability to breathe, like the artificial bloods and so forth, you do it in Boulder or you do it in Colorado Springs, one of those two testing areas. And the Air Force ran this program. Again, the person we focus on is at Fort Scott with the NATO blood program, and he's at the Colorado Springs, doing the moving the blood around. You don't test all this blood right from all these different NATO games and not process it somewhere. Here we go. This is the cyborg. Here we go.
Yeah, here's your this is just your, I was just Googling Super Soldier programs out of Colorado, but this is just one that was recently written. Your Cyborg Soldier 2050, human machine fusion and the implications for the future of DOD. So that's generally what all these applications are about. They're military applications. And kind of one last question to you before I let you go. It's kind of digging into that a little bit, because there were questions about the original SARS being like lab made and it didn't ever exist in nature. And it was kind of like you were talking about sword and shield earlier in the program. And there's some theories out there that the original SARS was like a sword and shield deployment by the military. And I came across this article. It kind of has to relate to that. Is it possible to engineer viruses to perform specific tasks within a human host? That is, to create viruses that are beneficial rather than detrimental to human health. And going on, and this was written in 1999. But going on in this article, they're saying the science is possible and we'll get there someday. Do you think that they may be what they're doing with these SARS viruses, because I know that's like they use viruses as entry points into the cells, and they kind of base like these mRNA vaccines off viruses. Is that like what we're seeing here?
Well, yes. Let's go back to the Colorado Springs or the Boulder example, where we identify some mutation in some incredible athlete that's a great bike athlete, and like, let's say Lance Armstrong, let's say, throw the drugs out for a second for Lance Armstrong, and just say for some reason his carrying capacity of his oxygen is so much better, and his basket that he has called the heme that carries the oxygens is just better, right? And then we find out there's some genetic mutation that causes that, and let's say it's only one, right? One letter that we have to change in the genome of all of our soldiers. Okay. Just like only one change causes you to have sickle cell anemia and not be able to carry oxygen. So it's possible that there could be some beneficial mutation. Now, what we have to do is we have to get to the heme as it's being made and make that change. It's sort of like if you're making the new bike, you have to get to the manufacturing process to make the change before it gets off the assembly line. And so I'm looking at Bob Malone's famotidine and all these studies being done for famotidine for 3 years for the domain. And what's interesting is it goes to two receptors, but a receptor in the gut that could be the precursor for the heme. Some of your intrinsic factor, some of your precursors for your blood is made in the gut. And those epithelial cells are the most rapidly changing. And it could be that if you just made one change in there and then created sort of a chain reaction for the cells that surround it, that they would make this mutation. They have to do some things called a junction between the cells and so forth. There has to be intercellular communication to do this, but you could make super soldiers potentially.
Is that a form of, I see Lance Armstrong being mentioned, is that a form of blood doping, I guess? Or,
well, it could be considered blood doping. You look at the drugs that like Losivirin and all these people use to increase their oxygen carrying capacity. The one I was familiar with and what I worked with is Thousand Oaks, California, was Amgen. And they made a drug that they would.
I love Dave Underdown's comments sometimes. Sorry. Colorado is a great place for speed skaters to train to get $30K for film shooting for John Sullivan.
Yeah. Well, all three brothers were speed skaters. If you remember, all three were in the Air Force intelligence. So was the gal who got shot, was the Wabbit, the rabbit, Suicide Rabbit was her email, Ashley Babbitt, the Suicide Rabbit. So all that was Air Force intelligence. All that's in Colorado Springs. It's usually where they do a lot of the super athlete, super soldier type programs. And trying to remember what the Amgen blood builder drug was, but Lance Armstrong took it. And then you figure out what's the mechanism of action that drug is doing, and then let's repurpose that, or let's replay that somehow, that chain that kicks that chain of events off. And that's really how you do this stuff. And with as much stuff as I see with domain, even though famotidine is a failed, it's a failed COVID, they keep working on it because I think they're working on this other thing. This is sort of sword and shield, but we don't have the answer yet. The domain studies are not done. We don't have all the data yet. 3 years later.
How much more money should we donate to them? I mean, and once the Ukraine-Russian war takes a break, we might have some more money for Bob Malone. So
this is not peanuts here. This isn't a Fauci 20 million here for predict and 20 million there, or this is billions. This is the real deal. We're on to the real deal here. And Ira Longini is sitting in the same cubicle next to Virginia Benassi. Just an interesting connection.
And just kind of on the end note, like there's some people out there that are like, Bob Malone's a whistleblower. Why are you guys still talking about SARS? It's a couple years later. And it's mainly because these rich, these global elitists, they were in charge of making the rules and and benefiting from them themselves. Us like blue collar people, we tried to start, like I tried to start businesses with Aaron Adler. A small business, blue collar people, we got shut down. Our kids weren't allowed to get their education. We weren't allowed to see our grandparents. Like the blue collar people of the world lost their livelihoods, lost their business, lost their backbones, and the rich elites like Bob Malone, who have all these different companies. And yeah, he did a lot of hard work to get to his place, but they didn't really feel the effects of COVID. And when we see these billion dollar contracts going into therapeutics and cures that you're benefiting from, that's why we're going to continue looking into this. So don't sit there up in your ivory towers casting a shadow on us blue collar people, creating rules and benefiting from them yourselves while we're down here just like dying in dire need, and telling us to shut up. We're not going to shut up, and we're going to continue doing the research until we figure out the origins of coronavirus.
Thank you, Andy. And I just want to say, for those people who don't know the story,
I wasn't telling you to shut up, by the way.
No, I know you weren't. Neighborhood News was also, had a going business, and it was completely destroyed several times. And so we had so many knockdowns when we took the printing business in house. That was knocked down. All the books knocked out of everything. We couldn't even get the cups. We couldn't even get the big cups anymore. They only would give us the little cups, and they wanted to move us to teacups. Erythropoietin. Poietin means to create or to make into reality, and erythro is the erythrocytes are your red blood cells. So erythropoietin was the drug I remember at Amgen 20 years ago when I went to the bio conferences a lot, and that was the drug that really made the difference for Lance Armstrong. And if you could alter that and have basically build erythropoietin into your super soldier, man, what a deal. Everybody's now a Lance Armstrong, and they don't even need to take the drug. Yeah, pretty cool.
Give me some of that, George Webb. I'll be sitting here as the erythropoietin spokesman for podcasting around the world.
I thought you were already on it. I was like, those guns that you've got, I'm like, what did you turn into a monster since I saw him last?
It's because there's a gym in the garage, George Webb. There's a gym in the garage.
I guess that's my excuse. I trip over my jump rope every day, and I trip over my medicine ball every day. I haven't touched it. Back at Neighborhood News, we used to throw the medicine ball when we were going through our ideas and stuff, and it was a good
you actually inspired me, George Webb. I remember I was going through my health stuff, and you would still go in the other room. You had those little like push-up handles, and you could pump out, like you were pumping out like 20 push-ups. And I was like, and then I went back there and I was like, let's see how many I could do. And I got like 3 of them, and I was like, well, looks like I need to start hitting the gym a little bit.
Now it's the other way around. I got to get back going. Yeah.
So George, I appreciate you coming on once again. You can follow George at Real George Webb 1 on Twitter. I'm popping it on the screen right now. Give me a second. Give him a follow on Substack. And make sure you go and buy the man a coffee. We're like I said in my little speech there, we're blue collar people. Just we're existing by a thread here, and we need a little bit of help, because we're not one of these big shot biopharma. We're not backed by big pharma in our little small journalistic endeavors here. So georgewebb.substack.com, buymeacoffee.com/georgewebb1, paypal.me/georgeswaggart, Venmo at GeoWebb, GeoWebb, and you can find all that information at Real George Webb 1 on Twitter. And George, it's throwing up his Longini, Robert Malone, Virginia.
This doesn't seem right to me, by the way, Andy. That's too big of a match. That's too close of a match. But if you remember, Jordan Walker was talking about women's health,
Mm-hmm.
and this line on the vagus nerve between, your hypothalamus and all the women's stuff. So I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Somebody sent it to me. I don't know if it's true or not, but why not ask Ira Longini? I mean, let's go.
I think there's some iffy stuff going on. If they're the ones that were pushing remdesivir and they were using their study to push remdesivir in the United States, and all them COVID-19 data records were destroyed out of Florida, that's a little bit suspicious. If you ask.
And remember, Andy, we were talking about it with the flu before the breakout, saying that this all came from the Soviet Union. Sword and Shield came from the Soviet Union, and we were just repurposing it before the breakout, before coronavirus ever happened. We were wrong about flu. It turned out to be coronavirus, but still pretty much the rest of the script is the same. So
yeah,
we'll see.
And you just mentioned the Soviet Union. Michael Callahan was in charge of that bio-industry initiative that brought all the scientists and chemists over from the Soviet Union and put them into our labs here in Ukraine and the United States. And also, like I said in that article, Massachusetts General Hospital was also involved in that process as well, with their links to the Soviet Union.
Can I just mention one more thing? Enrico Benassi, who was doing the nanoparticles, which was the nanoparticles, the shield.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He came from the same university Michael Callahan was at in Russia, and back to the Benassi family there. And we had Maria Benassi. Can't remember what Benassi. She was the Italian Minister of Health. We had Frederica Benassi, the WHO person who was doing repurposed drugs for the WHO. Frederica. We had Antonio Benassi doing the sniffers that you would put on light poles to detect an attack from coronavirus and particle matter. So there's a lot of Benassis. We did a show in March 2020 called 5-Card Benassi because we had so many Benassi in NATO, but we ran out of card games. We went to 7-card stud Benassi, and then we had so many Benassis we couldn't come up with a card game that could, it would have to be like Gin Rummy, where you have 13 cards.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is a good story. Here in the central part of France, this patron saint Benassi was the Pope's first guy who was chartered with getting the Papal States back for the Pope, right?
Benassi.
Yeah, and he starts an intelligence organization going all the way back to 1870s. I can't remember Francesco Benassi.
Francesco.
He starts an intelligence organization which becomes Catholic Action.
So,
which is the backbone, the intelligence backbone of Pius,
network of
Pius X, Pius IX, Pius X. The Mussolini's Pope is Pius XI, and it's the backbone, the intelligence backbone of Hitler's Pope, Pius XII. So the Benassis have been around a long time as far as intelligence organizations, using the Catholic intelligence organizations, Catholic Action, for all of the big changes, especially the fascist changes in Italian history.
Now you're going to tell me they took over the island of Malta at some point or something like that after the siege.
Sovereign military order, Andy. I'm just saying the sovereign military order is a cutout in Rome, which is its own entity, so that we can deal with it, sell weapons, we can launder the money through the Vatican Bank. It's an autonomous zone, and their only other footprint is on the island of Malta.
Yeah, and where was Operation Gladio based out of, George Webb?
It was Italy.
Italy.
But look at the overthrow of Libya, which was all a Malta operation, where all the flights, came out of, in southern Italy, Sicily, the air base there, Sigonella Air Force Base. It was all run. And now look, that's the same command at NATO, the Southern Command at NATO, that's doing the Ukraine bombing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the same Southern Command that did all the Yugoslavian bombing. Same crew. And, you know, you go just last thing, the driver Benassi for Richard Nixon is during the SALT talks where we're talking about the armaments and where the bioweapons are going to be kept and where the nuclear armaments are going to be kept. And the person driving them around is named Benassi. You just cannot make this stuff up.
It is almost like they're the Secret Service name when you see it mentioned in any international NATO document, any WHO document, you know, that's when you know that's the shadow government working at hand.
The only innocent person is the vaccinated courier, and the blood had to get back here somewhere. You can either believe Michael Callahan took a boat and snuck out of the communist China, or you can believe a NATO courier brought it back to Fort Scott and then got it to our labs.
Yeah,
So,
and according to all these articles, China was not like cooperating, and they were holding on all to the blood samples. So if that did get over here, there was some illegal actions taking place.
we only looked at people who had diplomatic immunity for their stuff coming back and forth to the United States from China. So that's all I can say. Is you weren't there, but I could tell you people, witnesses there, we only looked at people with armed diplomatic security services and above with diplomatic security.
Maybe the Dynport vaccine guy gave the CIA agent a Dynport plane to fly to fly over there.
You laugh, but Pete Buttigieg, whose uncle wrote the history of the Knights of Malta, they spent $1.3 billion on those Eclipse planes. For what? You know, it's a jet, it's a nice jet. Most of it's electronic warfare countermeasures to defeat so that it flies in a stealth mode. Right? So Pete Buttigieg is the guy, the intelligence officer in the Libyan war campaign that's running back and forth to where? Benghazi, Christopher Stevens. The illegal weapons, armed diplomatic security services. I watched 4 of the guys testify. Just saying. That'll be next week on Wednesday, Andy.
All right, George Webb. Once again, at Real George Webb on Twitter, PayPal, buy him a coffee, and subscribe to his. So don't you say please do it.
Yeah, do it. Yeah,
just do it, ladies and gentlemen.
Coffee. I mean, come on. Bob Malone says I'm doing this for a living. Bob.
We don't have $1.4 billion government contracts back in our defense. You know,
not making a living, Bob. All
right, ladies and gentlemen, have a great evening. We'll be back Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern. George Webb will be on the Duke Report tomorrow at, I believe, 5 p.m. Eastern, correctly. And you also have your weekend shows as well. Have a good day, George Webb, and stay safe out there, audience. You're up to 25 push-ups and 55 sit-ups, everyone. Okay,
I'm starting today. Andy. I'm going to go outside right now and see how many I can do.
All right. I look forward to your next Twitter video.
Okay. Bye-bye. I'll tell you how many I got up to next week. Bye.
All right, bye, George.